Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Williams, and I am the Associate Curator at the New Britain Museum of American Art. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's program featuring artist Jennifer Wenma, whose work is the focus of our current exhibition, Jennifer Wenma, An Inward Sea, which is part of our New Now series featuring contemporary artists. It is also the final exhibition of the museum's 2020 20 Plus Women at NBMAA initiative, celebrating the invaluable contributions of women to the arts while increasing representation of their work. Based in New York and Beijing, Jennifer Wenma is an interdisciplinary artist whose projects have been presented worldwide. She produced and directed the internationally touring opera Paradise Interrupted, and in 2008, Ma was on the creative team for the opening ceremony of the Beijing Olympics and received an Emmy for its US broadcast. Today, she will discuss her site-specific installation, An Inward Sea, which explores the momentous events of the last year, including the COVID-19 pandemic, extensive shutdowns, and subsequent racial justice uprisings in the US, and how they have impacted the lives of local residents. Before turning the program over to Jennifer, I'd like to acknowledge those who have contributed to the exhibition's success. First and foremost, we thank Jennifer Wenma for creating this visionary and important exhibition, which explores human resilience in the face of tremendous adversity. We deeply appreciate the invaluable team of exhibition collaborators, including oral historian Nisa Chow, members of the production team, Lance, Camo, James, and Philip Fortune, as well as Jennifer Wenma's studio team, including Jean DiBiase and Olivia Saporito. We thank local residents and workers who participated in the exhibition by sharing their stories of the last year and contributing to the Inward Sea Oral History Project. This exhibition is part of the museum's 2020 20 Plus Women at NBMAA initiative presented by Stanley Black & Decker with additional support provided by Bank of America. This show would not have been possible without the generosity of our sponsors, including the Psy Foundation, the Benzor Group, Dr. Peter and Grace Yu, and the Howard Fromson Endowment for Emerging Artists. And finally, we extend profound gratitude to our board, volunteers, members, and community at large for your enduring commitment to the museum. And now I'm pleased to welcome our featured artist, Jennifer Wenma, to speak about her work and her current exhibition. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Thanks for having me. Before we start, I just want to say that we're not over with the pandemic. So I'm speaking to everyone from my studio in New York City, rather than at the museum or in the gallery. But it's great to be on this platform to be with you, and I'm really thrilled to have this exhibition open when we're still not out of the pandemic yet. It's definitely a reflection of this time I've had in the past 14, 15 months. And during our talk today, you may see my cats running around, you might hear them yelling. They just had lunch and there you have the Zoomies. And if any of you guys have animals at home, you know what that's like. You can't keep them down, you can't keep their spirits down. So I ask for your forgiveness for any possible temporary interruptions there might be, but we'll soldier on. Okay, so I guess I want to start by saying that because the time that we lived in the last 14, 15 months have been really unprecedented in our lifetime, I'm super grateful to the museum to have given me this time to think about what it's like to make an artwork right now and for right now. Our conversation to work together began in 2019, when the museum was planning on this All Women, All Year exhibition. So the conversation was quite different at that time. And then I think I sent in my original proposal right before the pandemic began. As soon as the pandemic began, of course, everything shut down. The conversation was immediately, let's postpone the show and see where this takes us. I've been just so grateful to the museum team, from the director, Min Jong Kim, to the curatorial team, the Lisa Williams, and the entire collections team with the install. They've always just been, take your time. This takes reflection to think about what we will make now. And I really wanted to be thoughtful. I think if anything this year has given us is a lot more time to think and figure out what it is that we want, as well as what we don't want. So I certainly think of it as a very invaluable time. And where I arrived at is this project called Inward Sea. I will begin with some okay, so I think you guys can see. I prepared a PowerPoint. I always find it, being a visual person, I always find it so great to have pictures to accompany words. So I tried to do a show and tell kind of thing. I thought what might be interesting is, let's see, all right, got it. I thought I'd start out with just some past words. Okay, here goes my cat. That's Stinker, and he's called Stinker for that good reason. He causes a lot of ruckus. I thought I'd start with a couple of projects I did before the Inward Sea to give it a little bit of context. Lisa mentioned earlier that I directed and designed this opera called Paradise Interrupted. And it's been toured around the world. We started at Spoleto Festival in Charleston, South Carolina. We went to Lincoln Center Festival. And during the making of this installation opera, I came up with a new way of creating sculpture. So the opera I co-wrote and directed is centered around a woman in search of an unattainable ideal in trying to find her meaning in life. And everything she sees in her world, which is on stage, is generated by her voice, her singing voice. So first it's a horizon line and a pulsating flower. And then this line comes out of the ground like a drawing and creates a tree. From there, this garden unfolds made from black paper. And once the garden is completely unfurled, a magical world appears, and these background in the blue and purple is all from cut paper silhouettes. Here's a close-up. And the tree that you saw at the beginning have leaves, and then these fruit form on the tree as she grows with the process of this opera. And this is kind of the totality of it when it's in full view. You have the garden unfolded, tree above, and these fruit that actually brought down the destruction of the garden. When the garden is completely destroyed, the woman reappears out of an inkwell, rising high and singing a final song that belongs only to her. So that garden, using paper on stage that can be moved, that can be folded down into a few sheets of paper, but then can be opened into a whole world, is what took about 3 years for me to figure out and invent. And then I went on to do some other projects. This was done a month, actually 2 weeks prior to New Britain. It just opened in France. The project is called Cry Joy Park, and it's garden growing inside a Catholic hospital run by nuns from the 15th and 17th century. And the project also began before the pandemic and had to be postponed for a year. And I changed the original idea to about healing, because this used to be a church-run hospice, and it was devoted to healing of the human body for many centuries, as well as spiritually. And I thought I wanted to do a work that not only showed art can provide visual pleasure, but it could also maybe bring in some healing aspect. So these are all paper, sewn paper, what I call gardens on the wall. And on the left of the screen, there's a small garden that's kind of unformed, almost look like a cocoon. Visitors are invited to come in with their scissors and knives, and they can cut into this garden to shape and form it. Because it's a super meditative process to cut paper. I'm hoping that with this interactive portion, it shows that art can also be a form and a vehicle for healing. Okay, brings us to the inward sea. After the thinking about this project, I really meditated several long months on what kind of work I wanted to make. And I really wanted to make something meditative and thoughtful and reflective that we invite the audience to come in and be in a space I can think about this year in a hopefully productive, not in a downcast way, but create a place of community and provide hope and understanding. So one of the first things that I thought of was this idea. Originally, I had these swinging pendulums already in play. I was thinking about this year has been so much about human relationships, like distance. We probably have never been so acutely aware of distance from another human being until now, right? Like, is it 3 feet apart? Should be 6 feet apart? Should it be 20 feet apart? When we're on the street during the height of the pandemic or in the grocery store, we're doing this dance around each other in the grocery aisles. So this relationship with each other became so prominent, or you're missing your loved ones. You can't hug them, you can't see them. So I had this idea of these swinging pendulums in the gallery to highlight that push and pull, this chaotic energy, but the physicality of being with one another. And then pretty immediately, I had this image of a sea that formed in my head. I live in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and on my daily walks, that's one of the few things we can do on a daily basis was just walk to the waterfront park and watching the water and just seeing the water go through. It was very meditative, it was very healing. And being all being on the East Coast, the Atlantic Sea is so important to us. We're all kind of travelers across the sea, whether on a boat or on a plane over a sea. I think this idea of how the sea is a contemplative space, but it's also a very large body of water that our history is contained in it. From our earliest DNA evolution to how we are traversing through the new landscape we're in now. A dark sea, but I had this idea of a golden line kind of drawn on top of the sea as a reflective quality. So this play of gold. So this is the first element I began working on. I have a little video, I think. Here we go. I'll just talk so I made all these line drawings, and then we put them into a computer, and then they were laser cut into these very large sheets of paper that's been cut. You can see on the left is kind of the process of making one of the more complicated waveforms. And then once the waveforms are made, cut out, we painted. Painted the tip with a gold spray paint. And on the right, you can see the student drying. That's what it looked like, the gold on the black paper. This was done in my workshop in Beijing. I have a team of very mighty women warriors. This is the winter time. You can see it's the middle of the winter, right before Chinese New Year. In fact, during this time, there was a breakout of the virus near this province, the county. So 22 million people were quarantined and tested, and the productions were shut down for a couple of weeks until people could be cleared and come back into the workshop. So pandemic times, it's a global affair to make art. I would say nothing is untouched in this world. So here the women are sewing the pages together to form, next image should show. So when the sheets are flat, folded down flat, it's just a flat series of paper. But when we open it, this honeycomb form, this is showing the left, when they're opening it on the right side, the honeycomb opens, the paper can stand on its own, you can see the waveform. Okay, next, pendulum. I said I had this vision of these swinging elements in there. So I had to figure out how to do that. I've done some mechanical work before of choreographing movements within a gallery, but I really wanted to have a fresh start. So I worked with this team called The Specialists based in Brooklyn, and they were quite ingenious. I'll just give you, this is a workshop that we were doing a test with a pendulum swinging. This is a couple months ago in their workshop. And then all that had to be deassembled and brought into the museum. This is in the gallery during the install period. You see that flywheel in the middle image being installed in the museum with this truss system. I mean, to make something look effortless, it takes so much effort. And the museum team has just been amazing, led by Keith and Gabby and Mike. It's just been such a pleasure to work with them. And then on the pendulum are these glass pieces. If you remember what I showed in the opera, when the fruit opened and the ash came down and brought down the destruction of the garden, I was thinking about this fruit that's given forth by the garden. And this image has stayed with my work for the past 7 or 8 years, and it has evolved. Here, it's a black and white. They're cast in, they're hand-blown glass made by a glass artist in Pittsburgh named Lila Nilsson, who did a beautiful job with this white and black. And they are forms of sexual organs, male, female sexual organs, put together into this kind of mystical fruit. It's very bulbous-like. It could be read as buttocks, breasts, testicles. It could be sperms. It could be bodily fluids. You know, flowers are really the sexual organs of the plant, and the fruit is the resulting of that. And these two elements, I think of them as vessels, like these fruit-like vessels that are the stand-in for the human body. At the same time, they are very other organ-like too. They also look like heart, especially with the pistils from the flower, like a pomegranate, top of the pomegranate will have these little pistils still left. But they also look like valves that go into a heart. So they kind of stand in for the body. This is a, I'll just be talking a little bit about this. So you can see we're laying down almost like a sheet of paper, but it opens up into each waveform probably opened to anywhere from 3 to 5 meters, which is about 10 feet to 15 feet long. But when we pack them, it's just a stack of paper. And because of the gold that's painted at the very top of the waveforms, it really creates this, with the right lighting, this glistening effect. Here you kind of see a little bit better of like the ocean or the river. You see the water with the moon rising. So you kind of start to see this moon idea on the back, which I will go into next. This is probably the last part of the project coming together. I had the pendulum. I felt like they were very good counterparts. The pendulum will be swinging, creating this tension and release and the physicality of the body. And then the sea will create this great anchoring for our emotions. But I really wanted something that had a little bit more charge, that could really speak to the time that we're in. And this idea emerged of having a moon being projected over the sea. In the moon will be people telling stories from the pandemic. And that was the last element that came in that just kind of clicked for me. And I thought this could be something that's really meaningful and provide a vehicle for local residents to be involved in some way and have their voices heard. So the show, the exhibition wouldn't just be a static series of objects, but that it's interactive. And that fact is that we've only recorded half of the recording. And we hope that this exhibition scene will inspire people to come in and speak to us more about their experience. So I'll go into that aspect. So this is me just cutting. When I'm on site, I do a lot of modification cutting. So the work is not, it's a constant state of flux and transformation, because I don't think, I'm not very precious about the material. It's really about the idea that can capture the imagination of the viewer. Another interesting thing about this, before I move on from the paper C, is that our exhibition was actually delayed opening for a week because these paper components were being shipped from China to here, and the Suez Canal fiasco with the Ever Given being stuck delayed our transportation of these pieces. So we had to, I think it was delayed by 8 days, and we had to make do. But you know, again, can't sweat about things that you can't control, and just have to roll with it. So far I've conducted about 23 interviews with local residents, mostly from New Britain, but also from surrounding towns. Here we are in Lance James' studio with a green screen, and the people are filmed from the side, and I'm speaking with them with a conversation. But it's really not an interview process. This is what I call oral history portion of the exhibition. I work with a wonderful collaborator who is an oral historian, this interdisciplinary artist, Lisa Chow, who coached me, helped me, and opened my eyes to what this amazing practice can do. Rather than coming into the studio with a series of questions you're ticking off, really it is a time to let the speakers be authors of their own narrative, of their own stories. So I'm just a counterpoint. Maybe we start out with a question just to get the conversation going, and it's really about letting the individual take this conversation wherever they want to go. So the pandemic is just really a starting off point. It's like a jumping point, springboard, and the conversation went all different places. So here's a side view, beautiful high definition capture. Then we take the green out. Some of you guys probably seen this process in movie making, all those big studio Marvel films. So green screen, and we take that out, and then put the moon on top to create that silhouette. And I thought about silhouette because I thought it's a really interesting way of capturing characteristic of a person without giving away too much of their identity, allow them to speak more freely. And hearing the story is about going beyond the numbers and statistics. I feel like we've heard so much about every day in the news, numbers going up, numbers going down, whether it's about the infection rate or vaccines or job or economy. It's just so many numbers to keep track of. But what does it mean? What are the people and their lives behind these statistics? And this is my way of trying to get to that. What was it like living through that? What did it bring you? What did it remind you of? So here we are, is the installation in when it's finally installed. I'll just click through a series of images. You can see the swinging pendulums. Above the sea with the glistening gold waves. Very beautiful, and it's silent, but it holds so much weight. And the moon hosts a series of speakers. Here is the one in situ. This is a video. It's only 40 seconds long.
We try to escape from the reality to little hall and safe place to survive. Well,
it's hard not to like harbor any ill will towards people who don't understand that side of the equation. You know, some people will think it's maybe oh yeah, no, it's not that big of a deal. You know, I know people who've had it and they've been fine. And then you get the stories from some of the, you know, health workers like my husband that are, you know, really gruesome and really tragic and horrible. People dying, you know, in pain and alone.
Okay. I think this has been, for me as an artist, probably the most challenging aspect of the exhibition. It is the area where I stretched, expanded the most of my own practice. The pendulum were not easy, I have to say. We continue to have technical things. It's a new set of equipment that we're working with, so it has its challenges. But that's more on a technical front. I trust the museum team, install team. I know whatever problems we have on a daily tuning, I know they can handle it. But the human factor of recording these stories from the residents have been the most challenging in a number of ways. And you know, if you guys have any questions later about that, I'm happy to speak more in depth. But what Nisa Chow, my collaborator on this, described is that you are collectively holding a bowl full of water. This bowl is full of water that is emotion, the experience of the person. And you have four hands, and wherever, and the four hands between you and your speaker are holding this together. And your goal is to keep this half balanced. So wherever they need to go, it never spills, it never goes anywhere. And that you can keep that emotion, their story as intact as possible to then retell it is like our job and our goal. And I found that to be so challenging because how do you listen completely without judgment, without, and I don't even mean like people who disagree with you. I mean like when people are hurting, she kept saying, resist the urge to rescue people. Let them be. This is not a time about you. This just let them be about them and let them speak. So it was just an incredibly enriching, challenging time to learn how to really listen. I think I thought before this process that interviews about how to ask questions is actually about deep listening. So I have a 5-6 minute clip of just some compilations I put together. The voices are, they come in, you know, some people's voice is only 5-10 seconds, others might go on for a minute. And then after a few minutes, the voices kind of blend in together. I think of it as a wave. I actually call this section a tidal wave. It's like we, each human, is like a drop in the ocean. The ocean is vast, but it's made up many, many singular drops of water. And water can be soft and malleable, but can also be very powerful, can come in tidal waves. So I wanted the voices to work in this very poetic way. And that's how it works in the gallery. Right now, the compilation is about 30 minutes long, a little bit under 30 minutes. As we add more voices, we'll be adding to the length of that. And they come in these 5-minute cycles and will come in these tidal waves. What I'm also working on is each person's individual story from a 45 to 50-minute interview process. We're editing them down to maybe 10 minutes. So their story can be told in a succinct, compact way. And that will be on a database that will live on the museum's website. So when that's live, we'll be announcing that. Hope you will join us listening deeply into other people's lives. And any of you guys in the area, hope you come to the museum and record your story and have that to be a record of our times. So here's.
I don't think we as a society, as a world, I don't think nobody taught us how to be alone. I think we're afraid to be alone, right? So then when something like this comes, which is basically it's a pandemic of isolation, right? So when something like this comes along, you're forced to be with yourself now in the era of checking the cell phones all the time and being distracting and it's almost like the whole environment is against self-reflection or quietness.
This is a generation that actually saw for the first time in their life someone being murdered, killed on television. That impact is not going away. It almost reminds me of my dad, who was from the South, who actually witnessed a lynching that stayed with him the rest of his life. He was 7 years old, actually. And you don't lose that stuff. You learn how to deal with it.
I'll tell you frankly, there's certain days I'm happy to be masked, so I can just move in and out.
It's hard not to harbor any ill will towards people who don't understand that side of the equation. Some people will think it's maybe, oh yeah, no, it's not that big of a deal. I know people who've had it and they've been fine. And then you get the stories from some of the, healthcare workers like my husband that are, really gruesome and really tragic and horrible. People dying, in pain and alone. And it's not a pleasant, it's horrible.
I remember when I was a kid, the night I was sitting with my parents and John F. Kennedy was shot. I remember that when I was a little girl. And I remember seeing the fear on my parents' face, and I didn't really know what was going on, but I knew that something bad was happening, and I was scared. And I remember that to this day. I'm 62 years old. I'm almost 63. And I remember that to this day. It was just, you can feel the fear in the air. And I think that's what it was for the kids. They knew we were scared. They knew all of a sudden it was like, shut down, call your parents, let's go.
I typically have 35, 37 students in a classroom. They don't turn on their cameras. Now, you could, naughty students, you're not turning on your cameras, but there's all kinds of reasons because they didn't choose this online venue. They may not have a camera. They may not have the bandwidth to use a camera. They might be in a situation where they're not dressed appropriately, or they're in their bedroom, which they share with somebody else, and they don't want, the camera. So there can be all kinds of reasons why they're not using their cameras. So as faculty members, we can't insist that they use their cameras because we don't know the reasons why they're not. You have to be respectful of their choices.
Going into 2020 in general, I had a grandma that unfortunately passed away, so it was a hard time for me to come in. And since it's happened in March, it was just around my birthday, I would say 11 days, 11 or 8 days, somewhere around that till my birthday was. And it was a really hard time for me to adjust in general. I'm telling you, 2020 sucked.
I had waited forever to live alone again. I've had 2 husbands and 3 children. And the last time I lived alone was 1969. And so I was great with this. So I could write when I wanted, I could paint when I wanted. It's a very small town. I live off of a dirt road. I can go outside, nature, I can walk. I did not have some of the problems that some people did. And I was careful, but I'm not obsessive either.
That's the irony of America. We rely on children to raise us. That's our mistake. We had no legendary fathers. We had no legendary mothers. We arrived on boats and it was the sick kids that survived. And those were the ones that became our forefathers and became America. Think about that. We were raised by teenage kids and we still act like it. So for me, if there's no justice with the George Floyd case, there's no justice, period.
It was quite, shocking, monumental. There was a lot going on in my life at that time anyways. My mom was, on being needing care, and all our siblings were all taken care of that way. So
Then also
you know,
a tool for
look at the
certain
news and just
something.
try not to
People respect, cultures respect us as who we are as people.
When we're driving in a car, you know, you see the sirens, pull over and follow directions, do what you're told. Don't give anybody a reason to think you're a threat.
Can you believe something like not destiny, but something is bigger than us has happened for the reason. I hope that reason will change the world. You know, to a better place.
Here we are. That's a compilation of the video that's in the gallery. Thank you so much.
Jennifer, are you ready for some questions?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we have some wonderful questions. We have installation questions and we have oral history questions.
Okay.
Folks would like to know, what were some of the most challenging aspects of your exhibition? What were the most challenging and the most rewarding?
You know, what's interesting is some of the most challenging things were pandemic related, like things when we're making I mentioned this a little bit, when we're making the paper C. We literally got a call one morning. My studio manager there said, we have to shut down the entire county and quarantine everyone. And there's just nothing you can do. We had no idea. This was right before Chinese New Year. If any of you guys know, Chinese New Year is the time that like people stop working for a month. I was like, if we don't finish this before Chinese New Year, we may not be able to have the show in time. But at the same time, there's nothing I can do about it.
Okay, we have you back. So sorry about that.
No, I'm sorry. I Zoom all day long, like all of you guys.
Don't worry. We're so pleased you're here.
Where was I? I don't know where I got cut off because I kept kind of talking.
You were just starting your answer and talking about the shutdown and the interruption.
Did I talk about the quarantine in China?
Yes, you were just starting.
Yeah, I didn't know where I got cut off, so I'm just like not know because I kept on speaking and maybe you guys. But yeah, so at the same time, I would say because I've gone through the pandemic, I also realized that there's nothing I can do about something that is completely out of my control. So I think the idea of giving in to this and just letting it unfold, I think we had this conversation even at the museum when we were logging the arrival of the paper C because of the shipping fiasco. And we just didn't know, right? I mean, there are so few things I feel like, I think before the pandemic, we thought we're in control of our lives. And then now you realize that when the Suez Canal cleared, I remember that day, we were doing a recording and they said, by the tide and the full moon, this Ever Given was finally lifted. The tide was high enough, they were able, with everyone's effort, was able to move that. And I thought that was so incredibly moving that when we think we're so in control of our lives, we're not. They're just some elements outside. So I think just relinquishing this idea of control, it was both very difficult, but also very simple, right? Just saying, I'm open to whatever the world has and not feel like I have to demand my will upon this. So that's one. And the other would be about oral history recording. It's challenging because it's a new medium I'm working in this way, responding to people so sensitively, like I described. But also, people went through deep, deep trauma. It's just so clear. There's a lot of PTSD, and I don't like to use that word a lot because I know that's being used a lot, but it's repeated trauma. You hear in people's voices. And I spend, 20-some hours with them on recording time, but I'm spending hundreds of hours. I spend about 15 to 20 hours per recording to listen, re-listen, transcribe, understand the subtext. So I actually, a few weeks ago, I had to say, I need to create some kind of emotional boundary for myself because I'm naturally quite empathetic. So I was going through the trauma with them every time I listened to something. And when people are speaking in such a personal, vulnerable way, you can't help but being right there with them. And I had to learn how to hear and listen without getting personally involved. So that's been a really interesting process.
That's wonderful. And along those same lines, have you allowed yourself the space to reflect on your own pandemic experience through the creation and installation of an inward sea, or do you feel like this is your pandemic experience?
I think as an artist, I'm really, really fortunate that way. My job is to be reflective, personally speaking. That's my job that I've taken on. I joke about this. I say, art is the most useless, non-functional thing that you can do. None of us needed to, I needed to live and make a living. I mean, like, where when I have friends who are frantic to write emails or something, I say to my staff too, we're not neurosurgeons, we're not ER doctors. Yes, we want to be professional, but no one's waiting, like if we don't make this, no one's dying from it. But because of that, I think that's also the value of art making, is because functionality aside, because it's not non-functional in the way that our livelihood, our world in that way depends on it, then it frees us up to be reflective on the emotional, spiritual, and everything else that the world gives us. That is what I try to do. This is something I thought a lot about in this pandemic, in that, art world did shut down. All of this shows, including our exhibition, was postponed for more than 6 months. And the piece I showed earlier, Cryjoy Park, that's postponed for a year. And that's a case for everyone. I have projects that are postponed for 2 years. And, but being a creator and maker, I can continue to make things in my studio. I can still, this piece back here I made, it's very painstaking, hand cut pieces that are put together. And I painted, I drew, I did all of that. And I thought how fortunate I was. In this world, we have what, 7 billion, almost 7 billion people in this world. Everyone has a voice, everyone has something to say, everyone has an individual perspective. But so few of these nearly 7 billion people have the luxury, have the time, have the drive, ambition, and the space, and the skill set to really say these things. Whereas as an artist, that is what we're here to do. And I don't know if that makes sense. I just felt like I was very profoundly moved, both by the humanity that this pandemic had brought out, because of suffering we've witnessed in all different ways. And then I felt this very profound responsibility to be in a reflective space, you know, and that starts from oneself, right? If I'm not reflective about my life, I cannot be that I cannot be that a mirror or reflection for others. So yeah, this artwork is the result of the reflection I've had in the past. One of the resulting works. I think there will be more that will come as well.
Which leads us to our next question. How do you think your experience with the oral histories will shape your future work?
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, it continues. So I'm not done with it yet. We've only done less than half of the recording, and I'm still doing editing for the individual recordings. So that continues. So the learning will continue, and I think there'll be more reflection I will have. But absolutely, I don't know in what form it would take, and I think it's important for me to be completely open to wherever that takes, just like the process with the pandemic, right? I didn't know what work will come out of it, but just being patient and being open. My first experience with kind of a little bit like oral history, now I look back, was a few years ago when I first made Cry Joy Park, the black and white gardens. I worked with 12 women in that team, and they would just have such interesting stories when we're working. So during lunchtime, I began to record them because just like where they came from, how did they get to be in Beijing, what circumstances, and it was so interesting for that to hear, but I never did anything with that recording. You know, it was just kind of part of my personal archives. And I've shared a little bit here and there, and people always find it so interesting. And that was in 2009, 2008. So that's taken 3 years, but that always stayed with me. You know, like that vulnerability, candid intimacy when people are just you and them, and they just tell you parts of their story. So without that experience 3 years ago, I probably would not have come up with this idea. So I'm looking forward to where this leads me.
Beautiful. And we have time for one more question. It's kind of a two-part question about the installation. When did you first start working with paper sculpture, and what inspired you to use paper throughout all of your large installations? Also, was this your first installation to incorporate mechanicals?
Okay. So paper, I began working with paper really because of Paradise Interrupted. Prior to that, I made almost a decade, 8 years long. I made live installations for live plants. I would paint black ink onto live plants. Sometimes it's in a landscape. I'll go into a forest and just paint a whole part of it into black ink. Sometimes it would be inside a museum with, you know, hundreds, thousands of plants that's been painted black. And because Chinese ink is just made of charcoal, and the plants will grow if you water it, if you keep the roots intact, if you give it sunlight, then it will grow and change in time, and green will grow out of it. So I thought of that as two-dimensional landscape painting tradition from Chinese landscape painting with ink on paper to applying ink directly into landscape. And then with time and greenery growing in, it's like a four-dimensional landscape painting that's alive and that's not two-dimensional. And also it spoke to me about resilience of life form. So I did that for a long time, and I was very in a period about not leaving any residual work. I really want to make work that's very ephemeral. After the show is over, in the forest, the green will grow in, and eventually, sometimes it takes a year or two, the black will completely disappear. In the museum show, the plants will be adopted by individuals that come to the museum, and they will go from the museum into homes, you know, all around the city. So I found that to be very beautiful. It had a natural progression. And then I had this idea of making an opera because I wanted to create a garden that is charged by human voice. And I was really looking into utopia and dystopia ideas, the Garden of Eden, you know, But I knew that I didn't, for stage, I couldn't do like a 6-ton, sometimes literally, of installation with live plants. You have to water it. That is not very likely. And so I looked into ways to create a garden that could be easily transported for stage set purpose, but that it's not just like a backdrop of painting. I want to have physicality, that you can see leaves, you can hear the sound of rustling. It can move when it could be a small portion, it could grow larger. So dancers will come in and move these paper or the garden elements and change form. And I looked in all different kinds of things, and paper was one of the natural materials I looked at, obviously, because from lanterns we can extract to origami we have in Chinese tradition. It's a very rich tradition of folding and using geometric ways to create small and large forms. And the way I ultimately arrived at, I kind of reinvented. I took a few different traditional forms, way of constructing, and made my own. And in fact, this way of making sculpture, I have a patent pending on the way of, like, each individual sheet is painted, printed out, drawn from my hand, and cut on paper, out of paper, and hand sewn. And depends on the height, depends on the color I use. I can do a variety of forms, and it's like soft sculpture, but also has physicality. And then also it was also inspiration coming from traditional Chinese landscape scrolls that are a hand scroll. When you close it, it's just a tube, but when you open it, it's like a panorama of a landscape. So you have this richness you can go into. So I really like this idea of portability and something from zero, nothing, to this whole world within seconds. So all these different things brought me to the making of the paper sculpture, and I just love how versatile it is. The other one is about mechanical things. Yes, I have done mechanical things. I'm not very mechanically savvy myself, or technology, but I'm really fascinated by these way things work. So I first used larger mechanical components. Maybe in 2016, I made these dancing sculptures that would move. They actually had a choreograph. It was right after the opera as well. So I had one form that had a male singing voice, the other one had a female singing voice, and they were on tracks in the gallery, and they would kind of choreograph and dance around each other. I also had swinging then. The project was called The Furthest Distance, which is like so close yet so far away. They're like never quite in sync. Yeah, that was probably one of the first more bigger mechanical components I used.
Wonderful. Jennifer, thank you for the absolute gift of your time. I'm now going to bring Lisa Williams back on. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jennifer. This has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you for sharing these wonderful insights about your work, your exhibition at the New Britain Museum of American Art. It has been such a privilege and honor to collaborate with you, and we absolutely love your show. We're so thrilled that it is now on view and we can share it with the world. And I encourage all those who have joined us today to visit an Inward Sea in person at the museum, and to attend another forthcoming virtual talk on the show scheduled next month on Wednesday, June 23rd at 1 p.m. Do stay tuned for additional programming that will be forthcoming later on this summer and early in the fall. The show is on through the end of October. So we hope that you come visit not just once, but again and again. So thank you all again for joining us today. Jennifer, thank you so much as always. It's been a real pleasure, and we look forward to doing this again.
Yay, thank you so much. Please come see the show. It's beautiful.
Bye-bye, all.